This is the Singular 3125, or the Q-Tech 8500, or the Dopod S300, or the iMate Smart Flip, or the Orange SPV F600, or let's just call it the HTC Star Trek. In 2006, Taiwanese tech company HTC wasn't really much of a thing, at least not here in the US. And that's too bad because they made some pretty nice gadgets that seemed doomed to never get any serious attention. But fortunately for the Star Trek, they took a slightly different approach when selling this thing. Instead of trying to sell the Star Trek on their own, HTC decided to let other companies buy unbranded Star Treks, slap their own name on it, and handle the rest. Here in the US, the most popular version of the Star Trek was the Singular 3125, but they also had the 3100, which was basically the same thing just with less internal storage. Now for this video, I'm going to be calling this phone the HTC Star Trek, but that's not actually its official name. It's just a nickname, and honestly I'm not really sure where it got that nickname from. That's just what everyone called it, and the name kinda just stuck. This is possibly a play on words referencing the Motorola StarTAC, which was the first flip phone ever made. But however the name came about, the Star Trek was definitely a unique device, the first of its kind in several areas. This was one of the first clamshell style phones to run Windows Mobile, and without contest, the first to make a Windows flip phone look good. At that time, the Motorola Razr was still king of the flip, and everyone was trying to take its place. Ultimately, no flip phone could ever do that, and the form factor would die out before we could see another clamshell king. But if a phone were to have taken down the Razr, I'd want it to be none other than the Star Trek. Many reviewers compared the two phones, pointing out similarities in appearance, but honestly, I don't think these two look very similar at all. Sure, they're both super slim, but that's about where the similarities end. While the Razr has a more traditionally squared off look, the Star Trek makes things weird with its circles and oddly rounded off edges. Personally, I slightly prefer the Razr's more boring design, but that's not at all to say the Star Trek has a bad design. The textured metallic back and faceplates, a mix of matte and shiny black plastic, paired with silver mirrored media control buttons, camera, and hinge caps, all blend perfectly to create a much more eye-catching design than anything you'd find on your typical 2006 era clamshell. But style isn't even half of the experience. What really sets this phone apart was that it was running Windows Mobile 5, meaning this is not just another dumb flip phone. The Star Trek is actually a smartphone in disguise. There's no touchscreen, so all inputs are done through the keypad. That means even though this is a Windows Mobile phone, there's some apps that aren't going to want to play nice without a touchscreen. That being said, you can install Java apps and games, so you're not really missing out since those were more popular anyway. The Star Trek had some pretty typical specs for a device of its class. With a Texas Instruments OMAP 850 processor, 64 megabytes of RAM, and 128 megabytes of internal storage, it's got far more going for it than any typical flip phone. But it's not special when compared to other Windows Mobile smartphones. It's got the typical slowness and lag, so you're not going to be blown away by its performance. It's still a breath of fresh air compared to the boring flip phones everyone else was using, so it wins points for that. One thing that definitely does weaken the smartphone experience is that the Star Trek does not have built-in Wi-Fi connectivity. At that time, carriers were pushing their data plans with increased data speeds, so mobile phone manufacturers were often not allowed to bring their phones to that carrier if it had built-in Wi-Fi. This is a Windows mobile device, so Bluetooth tethering should be possible, but I didn't try it out. I was able to send some games over Bluetooth to the Star Trek, and as you'd expect, this isn't much of a gaming phone, but it's actually a lot worse than you might think. Most Windows mobile games are a no-go because, like I mentioned earlier, many of them expect a touchscreen or a different display resolution, so they'll refuse to work here. In fact, I only got one game to fully cooperate before giving up. The Star Trek also includes Java emulation that lets you run some Java-based games on here. I say some because this wasn't a great experience. Less than half the games I tried properly functioned on here, with half of them not installing and the other half just crashing and glitching. The gaming experience for those that do work isn't stellar either. This phone just wasn't built for this task, which I guess is to be expected. The Star Trek doesn't really make for a great media player either. It does have expandable storage via a microSD card, which would be great for storing music, but its speaker is pretty lackluster and there's no real headphone jack of any kind. The one and only port on this whole phone is one of HTC's weird proprietary things, so you'll be limited to using headphones designed specifically for the Star Trek. But hey, you get Windows Media Player, and as a bonus, on the front of this phone, you get these shiny media control buttons that make you think maybe for a minute this phone could replace your MP3 player. And maybe it could, who knows. What this thing won't be replacing is your digital camera. The Star Trek is equipped with a 1 megapixel fixed focus shooter that gets photos like this. Photos are dark and grainy with blown out highlights and muted colors. There are some photo adjustments you can make in the camera app, which is more than you could do with most phone cameras, but it makes very little difference in the resulting photos. One fun thing you can do with this camera is to flip it closed, and you can use the outer 1.2-inch display as a viewfinder for self-portraits. When the phone is closed, you can press the camera shortcut button on the right side of the phone to launch the camera in self-portrait mode. You can also hold the play pause button below the outer display to launch the media player, which is one of my favorite things about this phone. Just look at that text, font, and color. It adds so much personality to the otherwise bland software themes in this phone. Media playback is handled by Windows Media Player, which is cool but presents some odd difficulties when using the outer display for music playback. Since Windows Media Player supports all media files, including videos, it will automatically search the entire phone and add any media files to its library. That means while listening to your music, the phone will automatically go on to play the audio from any videos you have as well, which is kind of annoying. In standby, the Star Trek's outer display is used as a basic analog or digital clock, with 3 different styles of analog clock to choose from, and 2 digital clocks that keep with the Star Trek-y theme. This theming style seems to be only present on the outer display. It's not at all consistent throughout the rest of the phone. In fact, you get barely any theme or wallpaper choices here. It's practically the most basic Windows Mobile experience you can get. But let's be honest, having Windows Mobile on a slim little flip phone like this was something you couldn't get anywhere else. And that's what this is really all about. At that time, Windows Mobile phones were pretty big and clunky, so if you were eyeing the Motorola Razr for its attractiveness but needed the unparalleled tools Windows Mobile offered, the Star Trek was really your only option. And honestly, it was a good option. This is all great, and I'm gonna preface this by saying I love the Star Trek. This is one of my favorite devices I've ever used, but HTC's attempt to make a Windows Mobile phone that's also a slim, attractive flip phone that will blend into the crowd but stand out at the same time, it's just all too incoherent and niche. Despite the desperate effort to pack this phone with everything possible, it ironically lacks a lot. On that display on the front that I said was so cool, well, it was apparently prone to failure due to a poorly designed connection that runs through the hinge. This phone is also riddled with even more weirdness and quirks than what I can even mention in this video. For example, when powering off the Star Trek, you can't close the flip phone until it's fully shut down. Otherwise, it will just get stuck on the power off screen and never really shut down. There are several more weird hardware-software disconnects here, probably because Windows Mobile on a flip phone wasn't super common. With that being said, HTC made it work about as well as anyone ever did, so I'd say this is probably one of the best flip phones of all time. Yes, it had its flaws, but it filled a gap that people may or may not have been asking for. It may not have been super popular, but at least I'm here to appreciate it for what it was. And on that note, this month the Tech Show channel is celebrating its 3rd birthday, and I'd just like to say thank you so much to everyone who's subscribed to the channel, or even if you're just visiting, thank you so much for watching this video. If you are new and haven't subscribed yet, a sub would be super appreciated, and you'd be helping me create these videos so there's more content for y'all to watch. Make sure to leave any thoughts and suggestions in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.